Kuf Mem Testament Beis. So if you go up 5 lines from the bottom, from the wide lines, go up 5 lines into the skinny lines. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 really. Starts Mai. Mai Mashma the Hai Chalashim Lishna the Puruhum. We said in our Mishnah that Matilim Chalashim ala Chadshim. You're allowed to put lotteries, make lotteries for the Kayanim, what portions they're going to get. So you can't do that for the things that aren't Kachim, but for the Kachim you were allowed to. How do you know that Chalashim means lotteries? It says, we quote a pasuk. It's the same pasuk that we've been quoting. No, I'm sorry, we're going to discuss this. So it's very interesting, this Gemara. We stopped in the middle, discussing yesterday we were discussing someone that gets punished, that someone that causes a punishment on someone else is not allowed into the Mechitza of Hashem. One of the examples that we thought would be a source for this was that Tzidkiyahu causes a punishment to Nebuchadnezzar. So because of that, we thought that would be, so Tzidkiyahu isn't allowed in the Mechitza of Hashem because he caused Nebuchadnezzar punishment. We said, no, that can't be the case. So, okay, anyway, now we say, we quote this pasuk to tell me that the word Chalashim means a lottery. Quote this pasuk, Eich nafaltem mishamayim. How did you fall from heaven? This chapter 14 of Isaiah, of Yeshaya, is all about the fall of Nebuchadnezzar. So it's the prophecy about what's going to happen to Nebuchadnezzar at the end. So how did you fall from heaven? Hillel, this bright star, Ben Shachar, the son of the morning. Nigdata la'aretz, you're cut down to the ground. Chayla shal gayim, you that cast lots over the nations. I guess what he would do to them, he would draw lotteries. Okay, who am I going to get next? So Amar Rabbi bar Rav Huna Malamed Sheyamatul Pural Gedolei Malchus Leida Ize Ben Yemishal Mishkav Zachar. One of the things that Nebuchadnezzar would do is to the kings that he would capture, he would then sodomize. He would live with them, Mishkav Zachar, a homosexual relationship. And so he would draw lots. Okay, who's going to be for today? So then it says that after he dies, that all the kings of the nations will sleep in their own houses peacefully. That means that they didn't have to lay with Nebuchadnezzar. All the days of this wicked person, referring to Nebuchadnezzar, there was no laughter. That they calmed down, the whole earth calmed down, and they broke out into joy. That means that until now, while he was alive, there was no joy. You're not allowed to stand in the house of that person. I don't think Nineveh, where was the Hanging Gardens? Was that in Nebuchadnezzar's house? You're not allowed to stay in that house. You're not allowed to stand in that house. These demons are there. So Rashi says that if you go there, then the demons are going to go away, and they're supposed to be there. You're not supposed to interfere with what's going on. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Rav. We quoted this before. We quoted this yesterday. At the time that wicked person wanted to do to Tzidkiyahu, he wanted to do this, to have this relationship. The foreskin got pulled for 300 amas, and it was going around the whole assembly. Shnemar savata kolen mikavid. We translate that before. You're full of shame rather than honor. Shesega ma'ata ve'yorel. You also drink and I guess be uncircumcised. Orel is the gematria shalosh me'esav. That's the gematria 300. Okay. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, B'shosh they say Rasha Gehenim. When Nebuchadnezzar goes down into Gehenim, Rasha Kol Yard the Gehenim. So everyone in Gehenim got nervous. Amru Shemalim Shalaleinu. Maybe he came down to be the king. Oy Lechalis Kamaisim Uba. Or is he coming to get punished like them? What is he doing here? This new fellow. What's he doing in Gehenna? Are you coming down to suffer with us? Aleinu nimshalta, or are you coming to rule us? Aleinu nimshalta means are you similar to us? Or are you coming to rule us? It's two possibilities there. It doesn't say that people are use the term that's ambiguous. So Yatsa Baskel Vamra, a heavenly voice comes out and says, Miminamt, who do you pass in beauty? Redei vahishkava es arelim. Go and lay down and lay with the uncircumcised. That means that he's coming to be punished in Gehenna. Now the pasuk says, "Eich shavas negish." All of this is in Yeshaya 14. Over there, it's talking about the fall of Nebuchadnezzar. How did the oppressor cease? Shavsa madheva. Madheva, we don't know what this means. Amar Rav the Madheva stopped. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Shavsa Umazu Sha'amra Medud V'Havei. This nation that would say measure and bring, that means bring money. They were after the money. That stopped after Nebuchadnezzar died. Vikadami Shamar Ma'id Ma'id Havi B'Loi Mida. That they said, bring a lot without even any measurement. V'Rabu Yisera Hisaftali. Now we quote a pasuk from Daniel. It says that he added extra greatness to me. This is, I guess, Nebuchadnezzar talking. Amar Rav Yirmiyah Barabba. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav Yirmiyah Barabba. Malamid Sherachav Ala Rizafar V'Kasher Tanim B'Reishay. This means that Nebuchadnezzar rode on a lion, male lion, and for the cords that you hold the animal with,
the reins,
he used a serpent.
So how do we see what he says? Kol shechaver nenesh al yodei machnisanes.
So yesterday we tried to bring that maybe it was Tzidkiyahu that gets punished because Nebuchadnezzar, because of what Nebuchadnezzar did to him. I said, but that's impossible because Tzidkiyahu was a tzaddik. What was he supposed to do? So then the Gemara says that we see it from Gam Anosh L'Tzadik Le'Toiv. That anyone that causes someone else punishment won't be with Hashem. The Ra is Le Yugur Chara, means someone that caused someone else punishment. That's where the Gemara learns it from. We tried to get it from. Did we have another option over there? Yeah, we tried to get it from Navis. That maybe Navis is the one that caused Achav to lose the battle because it was his spirit. And we said, no, maybe that's just because it was a lie. Because Hashem tells him, say, go out. So he said, no, how do you know that that's because he caused the punishment? Maybe that's just because it wasn't honest. It wasn't true. He said, yeah, you're going to win the battle. So then we had to learn it from Kamanosh Tzadik Leitai. So, yeah, this came back in, this Nebuchadnezzar with the Mishkav Zachar, that came back in like, I don't know, like the Gemara was expecting to go back to that. The Gemara before said this as a Bechulu. Remember that, how it said it? It didn't finish it off. It just said, okay. Rashi over here brings that this story with him riding on a lion was after he was 7 years. He was like an animal. Nebuchadnezzar lived in the wild like an animal. Then he went back to his kingdom, and he said that now he's even greater. He was riding a lion with the reins. It was a serpent. Okay, the Mishnah says, "La yiskar adam peilim b'Shabbos." It's on the Ben Yehoyada that Nebuchadnezzar is a Gilgal of Nimrod. Same area, both Babylonia. But he says that the nun is nun kavod Nebuchadnezzar. There's two nuns there. Because afterwards, he quotes a pasuk that says what happened to him afterwards. Nebuchad is like kavod, and then there's the Netzar, the nun, and the Netzer. Okay, the Mishnah says, "Liyiskadam peilim b'Shabbos." The person shouldn't hire workers on Shabbos, even if it's for after Shabbos. So there's a problem over here that you're not allowed to discuss things on Shabbos that are not Shabbos day. From pursuing your businesses and and to speak of things that you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to tell your friend to go hire workers for you. Now, the Gemara is going to ask that this is obvious. If you're not allowed to do it, then you're not allowed to tell someone else to do it. If the problem is just the speech, and then you're violating with Neiver by causing them to do it, it gets even worse. So we'll see in the Gemara. You can't go to the edge of the tchum so that immediately after Shabbos, when sun sets, 3 stars, you'll be able to immediately hire the workers. You're not allowed to prepare, walk to as far as you can go, and then right when Shabbos is over, you'll be ready to do it. You're not allowed to walk there to be able to do that right when Shabbos is over. To do that and to bring the fruits. We're going to see what the problem is with bringing fruits. What's the problem with bringing fruits? But you're allowed to go there to watch your fruits because that's totally permissible. Now, you're not crossing the tchum. It could be, I don't know where your fruits are. It could be there at the edge of the tchum. It could be there after the tchum. But you're just going there to look. It's no malacha. You're just looking. And then after Shabbos, maybe Paris. Then on your way home, you bring the fruits. Klal Amar Abishal. Abishal gives a rule. Kol shani zakai bar mirasi rasheni lahashchala. Anything that I'm allowed to talk about, I'm allowed to go to the edge of the tchum and to be ready for it right when Shabbos is over. You will see which part of the Mishnah Bishal is referring to. Gemara starts off with Pshita. I don't know if the Pshita is part of the Gemara. We said that you're not allowed to hire a worker, you're not allowed to tell your friend to hire a worker. What's the difference you or your friend? If you can't talk about it, you can't talk about it, and you can't tell your friend to talk about it. Amar Rav Papa Chaver Nachri. No, the Chiddush is that your friend isn't Jewish. Very surprising Gemara. This is called Chavere. The Mishnah calls this Chavere. That you're not allowed to tell a non-Jew to go hire other workers. Maskefla Ravashi rejects this. He says, Amir Lenachri Shvos. Of course not. You can't tell a non-Jew to do things that you're not allowed to do. The only thing you can use a non-Jew for on Shabbos is to do things that you're allowed to do. You're allowed to have a non-Jew wash the dishes. Well, you're allowed to wash the dishes, so they can wash the dishes. To straighten out the house. Yeah, they can straighten out. You can straighten out the house, they can straighten out. Now, it turns out that they can do it in an easier way than you're allowed to do it. They can wash the dishes with hot water. They don't have to, you didn't tell them to do that. You can do it. They can do everything in their own easiest way. But you can't tell them to do something that you're clearly not allowed to do. So, how can you tell them to go hire a worker? I'm not talking about a friend that's not Jewish. It's talking about a friend that's Jewish. The chiddush here is you can't tell him to hire workers. In other words, the chiddush is the diuk. But the person can tell his friend, does it seem that you can stand with me in the evening, that we can discuss something? So in other words, he's allowed to say it in a way that's not actually saying what he wants to discuss. So you can't tell him, can you work for me? But he can say, does it seem that we can discuss something this evening? And the implication would be that he's going to be hired, but he didn't say it outright. The chiddush here is that he's not allowed to tell his friend to hire workers, but he's allowed to tell his friend that he wants him he wants to talk to him that evening. Masdisin manik Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. The Mishnah follows Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha because this itself is a machlokes. The Tanya, we have a brayso. It says, "Lo yahimer adam lachaveri haner shetamni milarev." The person shouldn't tell his friend, does it seem that you can stand with me this evening and we'll discuss something, knowing that what it's referring to? That's the first statement, that a person's not allowed to do this. That's the Tanakama. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha yahimer adam lachaveri haner shetamni milarev. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha will say, you are allowed to. Amar Rabbi Bar Bachana, Rabbi Yochanan, Alachak Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. So Rabbi Bar Bachana says the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that's his teacher, says that Allah Zak Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, that you're allowed to do this. It's interesting that we need to say that because we just had before that Halacha Kista Mishnah. It's very interesting. And our Mishnah says, well, we learned the Mishnah that it's Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. That was a diak in the Mishnah. We extracted from the Mishnah that Allah is like Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. You see, we wouldn't need Rabbi Yochanan. If the Mishnah said it clearly, I wouldn't need Rabbi Bar Bachana to say the name of Rabbi Yochanan that Allah is Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. But the Mishnah didn't say it clearly. We had a question on the Mishnah. We answered it with Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. And then it doesn't mean that the Mishnah is Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. That was a way of answering the Mishnah. Okay. Amar Rabbi Bar Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, my time with Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. What's the reason for Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha that a person is allowed to do this? He's allowed to say, I want to talk to you tonight. And without saying what his intention is. He says, the Ksiv, it says in the Pasuk. The Pasuk says, you will honor Shabbos from doing your activities, from not pursuing your business, and from not speaking matters. You will honor it by all of those, by refraining from these things. Which means that diber aser, the daber davar, you'll refrain from speaking these matters. That means speaking is what's prohibited, but here in mutter, but you're allowed to think on Shabbos, all types of thoughts, even business or things that have to do with work. You're allowed to think on Shabbos. You're only not allowed to talk about it. Okay, that's the reason for Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha that says that you're allowed to tell him that I'd like to talk to you this evening, even though in your mind you know what it's about, but you didn't say it. You didn't say it, it's not a problem. Ravacha bar Ravuna asks Rav a question. Does Rabbi Yochanan really say that you're allowed to think and you're just not allowed to talk? Is there really such a difference between thinking and speech? There's a problem. We have a statement, Al Mahir Lav Kedibur Dami. according to this, thought and speech are different. The problem is, we have a statement that seems to say that thought is the same as speech. You're allowed to think Torah anywhere, but you're not allowed to think Torah in the bathroom or in the bathhouse. That means that thinking is like speaking. That's why you're not allowed to think Torah there. So how could Rabbi Yochanan say that speech is asur on Shabbos, but thinking is mutter? Why? Because thinking is nothing, like thinking is insignificant. It's not insignificant. When it comes to thinking Torah in the bathroom, thinking is very significant. So it's like speech. You can't think it in the bathroom. Where it says, Shani Hasam Dimbein Kadesh. No, that doesn't have to do with speech. Even the thought itself is an issue. Your camp should be holy means that even thoughts, because the Jewish people are thinking of Torah, that means you have to keep the whole camp holy because of the thoughts. It's the thought itself that requires a holy area. It's not the speech. Hachanami, 1 second. Hachanami ksiv l'yer b'chavis davar. In that pasuk, it says you should not see nakedness, but it says davar. Davar we learned a minute ago means speech. That there shouldn't be nakedness when you're speaking Torah. It says only by like Rabbi Yehuda. That is necessary for something else. That's not discussing thinking words of Torah versus speaking words of Torah. That's talking about the Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, Akum arum asalikris kriyash makanegda. You're not allowed to recite Shema in front of a naked non-Jew. Idolater, in front of a naked idolater. Where it's a little surprised. When it says Mayer Ya'akum, what is this difference about a non-Jew that's naked? I feel Yisrael Nami. If a Jew is naked, it's the same thing. You can't recite the Shema. You have to be covered. We had all these sugyas and brachas. When it says Lemi Ba'ikamer, it's saying not only a non-Jew, not only a Yisrael, but even a non-Jew as well. Lemi Ba'Yisrael Da'asr, not only is it not allowed to recite this.
It says Ovid Kechavim. Ovid Kechavim does not really mean a guy. It means somebody who serves the stars, an idolater. A yid is not like an idolater. So
right. Yeah, what you're saying is accurate. It doesn't.
So there is a difference when a yid is naked, Sishma, or the other guy is naked.
Tell me that again.
It says that there's a difference. It says Afilo Yisrael Nami. But how could that be? Because there's a big difference between, like, it's Eved Kechavim is much worse than
So here we're discussing if a Jewish person is naked and you want to recite the Shema, so you're not allowed to recite the Shema there. He has to be covered. I guess you have to go somewhere else, or you cover him up. What if there's a non-Jew there that's naked? So that's what we're saying. So we say that it doesn't matter. An idolater, right? It says, what if there's an idolater that's naked? So, see, when it says an idolater, it could be that was just a general term for anyone that wasn't Jewish.
Oh, so you're saying they just got used to saying that?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, fine.
Maybe not. Yeah.
I'm having a little problem with this concept in yesterday's Tanya, which was talking about the intellect and the distance between that and speech. And it seems here it's kind of merging it together, where yesterday it was like two different worlds almost. I mean, one was a predecessor, but not automatically connected. You know what I'm saying?
You know, the halachic significance.
Yeah.
Yitzi, we need some help over here, Yitzi.
The halachic significance of the thought.
I didn't want to tell him that this wasn't a Tanya shir. I'm letting him go.
But I mean, okay, it's for another day, but it just seems that unless I misunderstood yesterday's, it's not exactly the same as what we're saying here.
So Dr. Stein, just to remind you, this is the Daf Yomi share. The Tanya share is after this.
Okay.
The halachic significance right now of thought is that on Shabbos you're allowed to think whatever thoughts, any thoughts that come to your mind, even if it's business, even things that you're not allowed to do. Now the Gemara is challenging that, but what about you can't think Torah in the bathroom? Obviously, thought is significant. It's like speech. The Gemara says no. It has to do with you can't. When it comes to Torah, it's not that thought is like speech. The thought itself is an issue because your camp needs to be holy, even when you think. The Gemara says 1 second, but in that pasuk that says your camp needs to be holy, it says the word davar, which means speech. It means we have a concern about speech. The Gemara says that that speech is a different issue. That speech is when it comes to reciting Shema, there can't be any nakedness around. And we quote that it can't be a nakedness of a non-Jew, of an idolater. Where it says, an idolater? What about a Jew? So it says, no, it means, of course, it can't be nakedness of a Jew, but not only a Jew, but even an idolater, there can't be nakedness. What's the reason for this difference? It says, Kivin Ksiva, Shebasar Chamayrim Basaram, you could say, well, they're not Jewish. What's the difference if they're not closed? They're, consider their flesh like not.
Regarding Yossi's question about the akum versus a guy, right, and so you seem to have said that it could have actually meant both. From what I'm seeing here, it actually says akum clearly ovid kachavim. It's not saying just stam guy, right? But maybe what it actually is saying, based on the way actually the whole mahalach of the Gemara is, it's loizu afzu. Meaning, it's zicher that a yid you can't. It's zicher that in front of a goy you can't. You would have thought that maybe an akum is amadom elakelev or whatever you want to compare them to in a certain way, that they're so not significant to us that it's lo meshane, loizu afzu, that even an akum you can't. But in other words, just like a yid, he's saying it's obvious you can't for a yid. I think it's like in a similar vein, a guy as well. I mean, he's not a yid, but you also can't. You would have a havamina that maybe an akum that is not considered a normal person in the same level of humanity, and therefore maybe they're not considered a problem because we're so just removed from them.
Right. That's very good. Very good. Okay, that's the pshat. Very good.
When I was taught, whenever there was a derogatory term on a goy, because of the censor and anti-Semitism, they put an akum. And it's always referred to.
That's a possibility. That's a possibility. But what Ramesh is saying is that it's a leizu afsu, that it's not only a regular non-Jew that it would be prohibited, just like it's prohibited by a Jew, but even if it's an idolater, it's sort of the way like the Romans looked at barbarians, like they're not they're subhuman, the barbarians. They're not Roman. What are they? So that's like the way the Gemara talks about the idolaters. It's like, what are they? They worship idols like barbarians. Who knows what they're up to? So, nevertheless, you can't recite the Shema in front of them. So, Kamash Malan, that's the Chiddush.
By Avram, Eliezer certainly wasn't an idolater. And he says, I'm a daimel chamar.
Okay, I hear. I hear. So, but nevertheless, it would still come out that even an idolater, right? I hear. You have a good point. Okay, the Gemara says, maybe it's taka correct. Maybe there is a difference. A non-Jew nakedness, you could recite the Shema. I should say, an idolater's nakedness, you could recite the Shema in front of. The Gemara says, no. Amar krav ever saviyim leiro. They didn't look at their father's nakedness. This is the children of Noach. It means that that's an issue. What are you going to say, Chaim? Noach wasn't an idolater, right?
But he
you have
was
no
a
raya.
guy.
You have no raya now. Isn't that interesting? Okay, let's leave. Let's leave that discussion. There's what to look into. Okay, now the Gemara says, "V'diber miyasser." Is it prohibited to speak on Shabbos about things that you're not allowed to do? Is that really an issue? So Rav Chisda and Rav Amnuna Damri Tavayu. Rav Chisda and Rav Amnuna both said, "Cheshbon shel mitzvah mutal l'chashbon Shabbos." You're allowed to make calculations about a mitzvah on Shabbos. Now, if you're not allowed to, I guess, act on it. I guess they're talking about speech. That's what Rashi says. These calculations. And Rabbi Lazar says that you're allowed to decide on tzedakah on Shabbos, which you wouldn't be allowed to give, but you're allowed to talk about it. That's why we make pledges. How are you allowed to make pledges in shul? I'll give this and that. What do you mean? On Shabbos, you're not allowed to give money. How are you allowed to talk about it? You said you're only allowed to talk about things that you're allowed to do. You can think whatever you want, but how are you allowed to talk about them? That you can attend to the needs of koach nefesh, matters of life and death, or the needs of the public. And you're allowed to go to the congregations, to the shuls to discuss this. You have to take care of things. It means you're talking about things that are prohibited. Allowed to go to the theaters. The karksiyos is the circuses. The basilkiyos, this is the courthouses. The fakech al-iskirabim b'Shabbos to attend to the needs of the community. Now, this could be matters that are prohibited to do on Shabbos, and you're going to talk about it. B'tana debei Menashe mishadchan al tinaikos liyaris b'Shabbos. Chaim, to make a shidduch on Shabbos, and valatinik lamdei sefer, and you can also set up a child to have a teacher, and the lamdei yumnas, or to teach him a trade. Rashi points out that that's also a mitzvah, to teach a child a trade. And you're allowed to set that up on Shabbos. How are you allowed to talk about this on Shabbos? The Gemara answers, your personal things you're not allowed to talk about on Shabbos. But things that relate to the Eibishter, that relate to the community, things that are a mitzvah, all of those things, that you're allowed to talk about on Shabbos. That's why you're allowed to make pledges in the shul on Shabbos. Because chafetzecha asurim. One of the Zmiris, chafetzecha asurim v'gam lachshei cheshbonos. Are you familiar with anyone sing the tunes? I don't know if it's in Kiyashma Shabbos or something. Chafetzecha asurim v'gam. Here mutarim. One of the Zmiris has these words in it. So matters of heaven, that is permissible to discuss on Shabbos. Yeah, the Zmiris contain in the Yitzhus all of these piyutim, these poems. They contain a lot of the halachas Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Shmuel. He's a student of Shmuel. Cheshbonos shel melech. They believe that melech is really supposed to be there's different things, there's different ways of reading this. Either it means regular thoughts, any like happenings, or it means malach, like what does it have to do to you? There's no unnecessary calculations. Shel mabakach are also unnecessary things. Mutal chashbon b'Shabbos, that you're allowed to think about on Shabbos. In other words, you're never going to when it says mutal chashbon, it means to think about or to talk about. Let's see. Tanya Namiyachi Cheshbonish Avru, anything that's past, V'shasidim liyos, or that will be in the future, asal chashbon. That you must be talking about. You're not allowed to discuss on Shabbos. Shel malach, shel mabekach, but things that have no significance, that you are allowed to. Mutal chashbon. Okay. Gemara has a question. We said that things that pass, you're not allowed to discuss. Gemara's question is, for a minute, we have a contradiction. We're on top of 150. B. You're allowed to make calculations that are not necessary on Shabbos, insignificant. But things that are significant, you're not allowed to calculate on Shabbos. Ketzad, how is this? A person can tell his friend, I had to hire so many and so many workers to work this field. I spent this and this amount of money on this this apartment, on this home. But you're not allowed to say that this is what I need to spend. Well, there's a little bit of an issue here, because you just said that anything in the past, you're not allowed to talk. You're not allowed to talk about. The only things you're allowed to talk about were things that were absolutely irrelevant. And from this brisa, we're seeing that you're only allowed to talk about things that are in the past, but not in the future. So, but in the last statement, we didn't have a difference between past and future. We had a difference between relevant and irrelevant. Now, we're considering in this brisa that what happened in the past is not relevant. But from the first statement, we said if it happened, then it was relevant. You're not allowed to discuss it. So what's going on with the things that happened already? Are you allowed to talk about how much you spent? It's a contradiction. Gemara says, for 1 second. It itself is self-contradictory, because things that happened already are not relevant. And you said you're allowed to talk about things that aren't relevant. So the last statement itself doesn't work. Ella, rather, hadika agrada gira gabe, hadaleka agrada gira gabe. It depends. When you're talking about things in the past, do you still owe money to the workers? If you still owe money to the workers, then you're not allowed to talk about it, because there still is unpaid things here. There's still things that aren't closed. So that you're not allowed to talk about. But if everything is closed up, it's just an old story that you're allowed to talk about. Gemara says, Ein machshichen. He said that you weren't allowed to go, quote the Mishnah, you weren't allowed to go to the edge of the tchum to hire workers right after Shabbos. Because you're not allowed to go if you're not allowed to go there if you're not allowed to do it. Tana Rabbanan, it's taught in the Brisa. This is a famous story. Maisa b'chasid echad, a story of a chassid. And we know that whenever it says Maisa b'chasid echad, it's either Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava or Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eily. Over here, the Mefarshim tell us it's Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eily. Shenifritz lei peretz b'teich sadeyo, that a hole broke in his wall, in his fence. And he decided he's going to fix it. This is on Shabbos. And this is Shabbos. He says, I guess he's walking on the side of his field. He sees the hole there. He says, I have to fix that. And he realizes it's Shabbos. He said, I thought about it on Shabbos. I'm not going to do it. Just the thought itself. A miracle happens. Also by Tzlaf, a caper bush grew over there. Now the caper bush has berries, it has flowers, it has the leaves, it has little sprout things that grow on it. There's 3 types of products that are considered fruit from the caper bush. We spoke about this in Brachas, the caper bush, the bush that grows out of the kaisel. It's on the wall, there's a bush growing. That's a caper. And from that he made a living. Miracle happened. He decided not to fix the fence, and because he thought about it on Shabbos, and a caper bush grew, and he made a living off that. So the Ben Yayada says that Tzlafchad was a spark of Tzlafchad came into Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eily, and he's the Chassid Achad. And a miracle happened, and Tzlafchad, one Tzlafchad grew over there, and Tzlafchad was L'Shem Shemayim Niskav, and he was collecting wood, maybe to fix a fence, collecting wood on Shabbos. If he's the Mekoshish, and Rabbi Kiva attempted to say that. They said, "What are you saying?" The Torah conceals that. But whatever the case is, that in a later time, he's careful even with the thoughts of Shabbos, and then he has this tzlaf chad. Okay.
Yitzi Kasowitz said that the shul's set because it's building a security fence around the shul, and it stopped on Shabbos. So as a result of that, we're probably going to have a lot of money trees all around the shul.
That'll work. Okay. I'm Rabbi Yehuda, I'm Shmuel. Maybe that's where the money tree comes from. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Mutala Adam Laimar Lachavere Lekrach Pleni Ani Hailech Machar. Person's allowed to tell his friend that tomorrow I'm going to take a long walk. I'm going somewhere. Now, problem is that walk is more than the tchum. So you're not allowed to talk about things that you're not allowed to do. This is nevertheless, you're allowed to say this. Shem yesh burgen in hailech. It's not intrinsically prohibited, what you're saying. It just happens to be that there are no houses along the way. But if you would set up like these guard houses, like toll booths type houses, or houses that the guards live in, so then it would be permissible. So it's not an intrinsically prohibited activity. It's just, it happens to be that you don't have it. So that's why you're allowed to talk about it. Tanan, it was taught in the Mishnah, you're not allowed to go to the edge of the tchum to hire workers, and to bring fruits. Gemara says, we get why you're not allowed to go to the edge of the tchum. Why you're not allowed to go there? Because you're not allowed to hire. You're not allowed to hire workers on Shabbos. It doesn't have to do with the tchum. It has to do with workers. You can't hire the workers. So therefore, if you can't hire them, then you can't walk them. Elalavi Paris. But what's the problem of bringing fruits? Said you can't go to the edge of the tchum to hire workers or to bring fruits. 1 second. You're allowed to bring fruits. Well, if it's out of the tchum, you're not allowed to. But if you're something that is not intrinsically prohibited, then it should be something that you should be allowed to do. Lema shem yeshem mechitzas, maybe if there would be walls and it wouldn't be Rosh Hashanah, then it would be permissible. My answer is mishkachas appears mechabarim. What we're talking about, so the comparison here is not so clear. Because over there we were talking about speaking. You're allowed to tell your friend that you're going to do this. Now we're talking about actually going and walking. I guess we're following Abba Shaul's statement that anything that you're allowed to do, you're allowed to talk about. It must be referring to that. So why are you not allowed to talk about this? There's no malacha there. And even if there is a malacha, it's not intrinsically asur. Just like we said, that's something that's not intrinsically prohibited, you're allowed to discuss. So we answer no. When we say to bring fruits, we don't mean because there's a bushel of fruits over there. What we mean to bring fruits is that you have to cut them off the tree. It is intrinsically asur. It's not just carrying, which, well, if there would be a string, it would be allowed. It's cutting it. That's prohibited. But Tani Rabbi Shein Machshichen al Tchum Lahavi Tevin V'Kash. 1 second. It says he can't go to the edge of the Tchum to bring straw or hay. Okay. You're claiming that the issue over here is the cutting of it. So kash, the straw, could be attached to the ground. But how could hay means that it's cut. How could it still be attached? It's betiv nesaria. It's talking about hay that got rotten, and it's muktzah. And it is intrinsically asr, even though it's not biblically asr, but it's intrinsically asr because it's muktzah, you can't move it. Tashma, come and listen. It says that you're allowed to attend to the needs of a kala and the needs of a deceased. Those things. On Shabbos you're allowed to attend to, but you're not allowed to attend to the needs of anyone else. What are we talking about attending to the needs? What do we need? It says Bishleima Acher Dumi the Kala. For a kala, you're allowed to discuss it, but for someone else, you're not. What are we referring to? We're referring to mishkachas la lemigzabet layasa. You're allowed to cut myrtle branches. Something that they had by the weddings, they would have myrtle branches. What would they do with them? They would make some sort of canopy, or they would wrap it around like a crown. I think it was some sort of canopy. Elamais, mind you. What are we saying that for a corpse, for a deceased, you're allowed to do, but not for someone else? What is that? What are we referring to? You're allowed to discuss. We have to bring a coffin. You have to bring the shrouds. So what's the problem? Why aren't you allowed to talk about that? What's the problem? You said that if it's not intrinsically asr, it's just that you don't have the string over there, the wall. So, but if there would be a wall, then it would be permissible. It's not intrinsically asr. So therefore, you should be allowed to talk about it. 1 second. You said only for a corpse you're allowed to, but not for someone else. They were talking about the cut, so there's different interpretations, but the megad. We're not talking about just bringing. Bringing, that would be permissible to talk about for anyone. You want to bring something. But what we're talking about here is that you have to make it, and that you're not allowed to talk about unless it's for a mitzvah. We say, but you can go to the edge of the tchum to guard the fruits. That's no malacha. And you're allowed to go there, and then right after Shabbos, you bring the fruits. Gemara says, 1 second. You see, you have to recognize that we said we're not just bringing fruits. We're actually cutting the fruits. That's what we just said, because to bring it, there would be no issue. To go there to bring it. We say, you're going there to watch, and then after Shabbos, you cut and you bring it. Because you didn't go there for a malacha. You went there just to do a non-malacha, which is just to guard. The problem is you didn't make Havdalah yet. How are you allowed to bring it back? Rabbi Lezer ben Antignos, Mishum Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov, Oslei Ledam Sheyasech Hafetzav Kedim Sheyavli. You have to make Havdalah. You make Havdalah, you can't do any malacha. V'chitem ed Havdalah b'tefillah. You say, well, what's the problem? He said, Atochen Antano. In the Shemon Esrei, in the prayer after Shabbos, we add in a paragraph that's like a Havdalah. It is a Havdalah. That's not a good answer, because you have to say an actual Havdalah. Just the Havdalah that you say in Shemon Esrei isn't good enough. So how are you allowed to start cutting fruits? Maybe you'll say that, yeah, you found over there a cup of wine. What do you know? It's like Light's daughters found in the cave. They found some wine. Someone left it there. So the Gemara says, Kais besadim miyika. 1 second. It's in the field. How do you get a cup of wine in the field? No, it's possible. It was the time of the wine press. and there was wine all over. They were pressing the grapes, and they found wine. He made Abdullah, and that's why he was able to cut the fruits. Amle Rababa Rab Ashi, the Marav Amrin and Hachi. In Eretz Yisrael, they say the following: Amadu min Kodesh l'chol. They just say, "Blessed is God that separates between holy and mundane," which that's like a type of Abdullah. And then they do whatever they need. Amar Rav Ashi says, "Ki Avina be Rav Kana." I was in the house of Rav Kana. Ava Amar Amadu min Kodesh l'chol, Saltin and Silti. He would say Amavdil ben Kodesh l'chol, and then we'd go cut wood. Yeah, it's a big discussion in Shulchan Aruch. If the man needs to say Amavdil ben Kodesh l'chol, if he said Avdallah and Shemon Esrei, it sounds like from this Gemara that he davened Ma'ariv, and he didn't say Avdallah on a cup of wine. So how's he allowed to bring the fruits? Well, he said Amavdil ben Kodesh l'chol. Really? Amavdil ben Kodesh l'chol adds something to Avdallah and Shemon Esrei? He didn't even use the cup. What did he do? You said, what are you gaining by Amavdil ben Kodesh l'chol if you didn't? So maybe it means that he didn't say Avdallah and he didn't say Shemon Esrei, and this is in place of that. If we say Shemon Esrei, you go home, you make Avdallah, you light the candle. Do you have to say Amavdil ben Kodesh l'chol before you light the candle? You said Atachayin Antonovich, Shemon Esrei, it's good enough. I understand the women have to say Amavdil ben Kodesh l'chol. They didn't have a Ma'ariv. But if you daven Ma'ariv, do you have to? I don't know, it's interesting. Okay, Klal Amar Abishal Kol Shani. Abishal says that Abishal's statement, anything that I'm allowed to talk about, then I'm allowed to go to the edge of the Tchum to wait till then the Shabbos to perform. I'm allowed to go for that intention. If I can talk about it, I can go for that intention. So, Iboilu. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be in there. It says, Abishal Ahe. What's Abishal referring to? Eily Ma'areshakai. Oh, do we say he's talking about the beginning of the Mishnah? No, Abishal is giving us a rule. But for which part of the Mishnah? The beginning of the Mishnah says, Ein machshichan al tchum liskar peilim lavi peiros. You can't go to the edge of the tchum, the edge of the area that you're allowed to walk on Shabbos, which is 2,000 amas out of the city. You can't walk there to hire workers and to bring fruits. And then he says, anything that I'm allowed to talk about, I'm allowed to go there. Really? That's what Abishal says? He should have said different. He should have said, Kol she'eni zakai b'mirasei. Because I'm not allowed to talk about hiring workers, so therefore I'm not allowed to go there. The first part of the Mishnah says you're not allowed to. Abishal says a rule, anything that you're allowed to talk about doesn't fit in. It's the first part of the Mishnah, he should have said it in a negative. Anything that I'm not allowed to talk about, I'm not allowed to go there. That's what it should have said. Okay, so it's talking about the Sefer. What does the Sefer say? You see, it's positive in the Sefer. But you are allowed to go lishmar, to guard, maybe peiros biyadei, and then to bring the fruits after Shabbos. Where it says, no one said about talking. What he should have said is anything that I'm allowed to do, I'm allowed to talk about. The point of reference is wrong. The end of the mission says you're allowed to go there. Abishal could come along and say, oh, if you're allowed to go there, then you're allowed to talk. You're allowed to talk about it. Because there's no malacha. Gemara says, Laila ma seifa. Really, it's talking about the seifa. Abishal lahakai, and Abishal is talking about the following. Damar Rabbi Yehuda, Damar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda says, Neima Shmuel ladam le'machaver Shmuel perish betchumach v'ani Shmuel perish betchumi. You're allowed to tell your friend, I have some fruits that are in your area. We're talking about where they set up a Erev Tchumen in different parts of town. This one set it up in this part of the town. This one set up in that part, out of the town rather. So this one can walk 2,000 amas that way. And this one can walk 2,000 amas that way because before Shabbos, they put food in a certain location. That becomes their location for Shabbos. So a guy can tell his friend, look, I have these fruits over there. I don't want anyone to take them. Can you watch those fruits? They're mine. I can't go there because they're out of my tchum, but you could go there. And meanwhile, I'll watch the fruits that you have on my side of the town. I'll watch them for you. Come Rabbi Shal Tanakama. If a person's allowed to say that, so Rabbi Shal says to the Tanakama, Milei Moedes, do you not agree? The mutter Adam leim lachaver shmali perisha betchumach vani yashmalach perisha betchumi. That you're allowed to say this. Kol shazakai b'amirasei. Anything that you're allowed to talk about, you're allowed to also do. Ve'ima kol shani zakai b'amirasei rishani lahachshachalav. Why don't you say anything that you're allowed to talk about? You're also allowed to go and watch. In other words, you should be allowed to go and watch the fruits of your friend that are at the edge of the tchum, because you're allowed to talk, you're allowed to say that, and that would be including other things. So Abba Shal is asking Tanakama, why don't you say that? You'll be able to include other things as well. The Gemara says, Klal asuyimai. What other things would you include? I mean, basically, the Tanakama said the same thing. Why do they have to give this general rule that's going to include something? We don't know what you're even talking about. What is it going to include? La'asuyei hadatana Rabbana would include the following. You're not allowed to go to the edge of the tchum to bring an animal. Why? You're going to pull it from the other end of the tchum, maybe the rope, you're going to pull it in from across the border. But you're allowed to say, what's the animal? Betsy, come over here, right? You're allowed to call it. Oh, if I'm allowed to talk about it, I'm allowed to call it, then I'm allowed to also go there to be ready for right after Shabbos. You're allowed to go there to prepare, to be ready right after Shabbos for matters of a bride, for matters of a funeral, to prepare the Aron and Tachrichem, and you can say, Lech l'makam plani. You're allowed to say all of those things to the person that's going to be going there. You're not supposed to say exact numbers, 100, 200. You say chalas. It says, okay.